Yeah, interesting first day at Monaco. Massive amount of traffic. At the end of FP1, 19 cars on track. Lance Stroll was in the pit lane. 19 cars on track. And the problem is, at that point, nobody was doing long runs. Everybody was trying different compounds, which inevitably means quick lap, slow lap, quick lap, slow lap. And so trying to get a free lap, almost impossible around Monaco. Having said that, trending Charles Leclerc quickest in both sessions, despite dramas very early on in FP1, almost before the thing had begun. He ran into the back of a wayward Lance Stroll going into the station hairpin, the very, very tight left-handed. I still call it the station hairpin because that's what it used to be. I don't know what Lance Stroll was doing. He'd moved over, I think, and then decided to get back onto the racing line. He was in sort of one of these massive turn right without indicating or looking moments, and Charles had no option but to lock up and go straight into him. Had to cruise around and get a new front wing. Bit of a drama right at the beginning for the key Ferrari driver, winning last year. I say the key Ferrari driver. Most of the Monegasque crowd there rooting for Charles, of course, but no disrespect to Sir Lewis Hamilton, who was really good today as well. Anyway, a lackluster day for Lance Stroll, needless to say, because present in the pit lane was none other than Adrian Newey, all dressed up in his Aston Martin kit, the headmaster on the prowl, everybody on their best behaviour, Fernando Alonso doing a very good job all day, but a completely different atmosphere straight away at Aston as soon as Adrian stepped into the pit lane. Anyway, back to business. Charles Leclerc then had other dramas which were related to, I mean, he was really quick in FP1. He was quickest by the end on soft tyres, and there was a lot of mixing and matching. We'll get onto that in a second. But Charles quickest, despite saying that the car felt terrible, understeer on, was it left-handers, oversteer on right-handers, or was it vice versa? Anyway, by the end he was complaining he had nothing left on the left front, but no surprise because he did a lot of laps on that soft tyre. Anyway, yeah, talking about tyres, we are going into this Monaco Grand Prix with a completely new regulation, which is that every car must make 2 pit stops. They're even going to apply that if it's a wet race, assuming it starts on extreme wets. So there'll be an extra set of intermediates issued to all the teams for this weekend. And horrendously cramped and crowded working conditions for the mechanics in the pit lane at Monaco aside, it will be quite interesting because although this is the range that we saw at Imola, the softest in the Pirelli range, the new C6 soft, very good there as we saw, that soft does appear to be a raceable soft for some people where they might be placed on the grid and what they might be looking for in the race. So 3 raceable compounds, and we saw that in FP1. Lots of different running, hards, mediums and soft. Quite difficult to keep on top of exactly what was going on, particularly with all these slow laps going on between the quick ones and the dramas of traffic. But Charles Leclerc, as I say, quickest. Lewis Hamilton looking pretty good in the other Ferrari as well. But it wasn't really until FP2 that we got down to some business. And we saw some really good stuff, particularly through one of the most dramatic and, I think, revealing sections of the Monaco lap, which is the Rascasse section, breaking into that Rascasse right-hand hairpin, which is braking under load from relatively high speed, about 195 kilometers an hour, down into second gear. And we saw some big variations there and some beautiful driving as well. So FP2 was really when the music began this weekend for Monaco. And just looking at the time, Charles Leclerc quickest again. Very, very good run by Charles. He just seemed to be on it, just driving like Charles Leclerc, looking like a winner already of the Monaco Grand Prix in what looks to be a very good Ferrari. As I said to Cameron earlier this week when we did a live chat, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the Ferraris going well at Monaco. Traction's never really been one of their problems. They've had lots of other issues, but these two guys were never going to be slow around Monaco in that car. So Charles Leclerc was quickest. Oscar Piastri, who had a dramatic FP2 because he outbraked himself going to Sainte Devote early in the session, took the nose off the car, which then effectively limited the amount of running he was going to do with fuel in the car towards the end. But he still did a good job to be P2. Lewis Hamilton, third quickest for Ferrari, running different setups, different tyres at various stages as well. So very good teamwork there. Got to say that about Ferrari after all the criticism we've been giving them recently. Lando Norris, fourth, looking clean and fast and looking as if he's pacing his weekend. I thought it looked very good today, even though he's only P4. Liam Lawson, who P5, no real surprise there in a way because he's a wide turn-in, oversteery driver, good car control. Providing he drives within himself, he's always going to be quick around a circuit like Monaco. But more significantly, I think Isack Hadjar hit the wall twice in FP2. Once on the apex going into the chicane with the left rear, which was ungainly, clumsy. Hitting an apex at Monaco it's not as good as hitting an exit, is it? If you're hitting an exit, it means you're running out of road. An apex is what? Bad judgment. Anyway, he hit the apex, and then he did do more of a classic Monaco a little bit later on, running wide out of Saint-Devote and hit the left rear, which was okay, but then it bounced the left front into the guardrail, which then bent the front suspension on the car. So I've often said, for those that want to go back years and years and years on this channel, I've often said that within a team, if one of the teammates at Monaco early on has an issue, hits a wall or does something like that, it usually lifts the other driver quite dramatically. And that's why I say I think Lando's looking quite good. He didn't overreact to Oscar making that mistake. He just kept his calm, but this will be good momentum for him. But equally for Liam Lawson, it was kind of, yeah, okay, Isack Hadjar can make mistakes, and here I am doing a good job. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of that psychology in that as well. Fernando Alonso continued to look good in the Aston Martin on light fuel anyway. The Williams's Kimi Antonelli, not bad at all. Actually quicker than George Russell. Again, shouldn't read too much into it, because in terms of the quick laps they were doing on light fuel, just trying to get the car set up, the odds of getting the right setup at exactly the moment when you got a free-ish lap were 1,000,000,000 to 1, really. So shouldn't read too much into that. Kimi Antonelli also had an issue right at the end of FP1 when he hit the guardrail on the inside. He was going into Casino Square, top of the hill, looked pretty good, a little bit tentative, as I'd been saying, in terms of fast, medium speed corners, and this is a quick bit of road, and it looked like it just got the better of him in terms of just his initial turn in, and then the second part he hit the guardrail on the left. Again, a bit of a clunky, apexy incident rather than running wide or anything like that, but he recovered well from that and looked pretty good when he got into a rhythm in FP2. Kimi Antonelli a little bit quicker than George Russell, who was not able to match free laps with decent setup and decent position for the tyres. And then finally Max Verstappen, who was a similar thing, looked very good when he was out, very, very good. And right at the end, as we'll see now, if we go to the fuel runs, you'll see how good he was on fuel. So underestimate Max at this point at your peril. I don't think anybody is, but the reality is that Max was very, very good with fuel in the car right at the end of FP2. Charles Leclerc, who was on the hard tyre, as I say, there's a bit of a mix and match there. You can see how quick he was on that hard tyre on the Ferrari, just getting more and more speed out of it, really, finishing with a 13.9 and a 14.9 his last two laps, but very consistent given, well, got to say here, when everybody's out with fuel in the car and they're doing a long runs, Monaco and Formula One looks much better because traffic isn't anything like as much of a problem, even though everybody's on track. Basically, everybody's on quick laps all the time. Maybe we should have a new rule. If you go out, you can't do slow laps anymore. That'd be interesting from Pirelli's point of view, wouldn't it? I think that's, thinking about it, that's one of the issues, isn't it? It's why we have so many dramas in traffic, is because these tyres, when you're doing short runs, you can only get one lap and then you have to slow down again. And that's the cause of it all. Look at that. You know, when everybody's out with fuel in the car, they're all doing consistent laps. Very few slow laps in the middle of any of those. Oscar Piastri, as I say, didn't really do any runs because of that earlier front wing thing, put him on the back foot. Lewis Hamilton was on the medium tyre, not as quick as Charles, as you can see there. Interesting, isn't it? Charles on the hard, Lewis on the medium, and the hard tyre's quicker. Maybe Charles, maybe that's the performance of the Pirellis. Everybody else will be thinking, wow, that's good news for us in terms of not having used the hard tyre, because it looks like a mega race tyre at this point already. Lando Norris, 14.6, 14.7, 14.2, 14.2 the quickest. You could say not brilliantly quick, but having said that, very, very good rhythm. And yeah, again, discount him at your peril at this stage. I thought he looked very good today. The way he was driving, he was slightly earlier into every corner than Oscar Piastri, slightly less oversteer, using the tyres less, asking less of the car, and just looked very neat and tidy, I thought. Fernando Alonso, for all his pace on light fuel, not particularly quick in the Aston Martin with heavy fuel, and getting quite wound up in FP2. What was he wound? Oh yeah, he was wound up. He said it was very disconcerting. Keep following cars that kept straight lining the chicane down on the waterfront because they're just braking a little bit too late or whatever. And he found it very difficult following cars that kept doing that all the time, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that ad nauseum. Thanks, Fernando. Actually, I think he's probably quite right. You know, the racetrack's the racetrack. You start doing that too much, you get a penalty. Yeah. And then finally, Max Verstappen. I was raving earlier about his performance on heavy fuel. Look at that. He actually had a big moment, which I haven't put in there. It was like a 2-minute lap. When he went into, was when Nico Rosberg went off, supposedly, when he got the pole for Monaco, secured the pole for Monaco when he and Lewis were at Merck, down into Mirabeau. It was quite odd, really. He turned in and then he just turned left and just went down the escape road. Took a while to find reverse. And then didn't come into the pits, kept going round and round, and then did 16-0, 15-2, 14-4, 13-9 right at the end. Just like, as I say, nobody really noticing. It was checkered flag time, I don't think. But look at that. That looks really good to me. And so don't read anything about him being only P10 today. So getting back to what I was talking about earlier with the sketching and Rascasse and the difference between Charles and Max, and say Oscar and Lando, and putting a bit of Lewis in there as well. Interesting to see the minimum speeds at the end of that, when they're all on quick laps with fuel in the cars. In other words, about the same time they're out. As predicted, Lando Norris, minimum speed in Rascasse, 60 kilometers an hour. That's right in the middle of the corner, what we would call his apex. But the transition point, minimum speed for Charles Leclerc, 57. Exactly what I said. Driving the way he does with early turn in like that and the speed he gains going in, he has to sacrifice that somewhere, and it is on that transfer. It's that rotation of the car. 57, so 3 kilometers an hour slower than Lando mid-corner, but for sure quicker around the whole of Rascasse. Max, 58, only 1 kilometer quicker than Charles Leclerc. But get this with Max. He goes in, at one point, when he comes out of the brakes, he's doing 66 kilometers an hour. And he slows right down to 60 kilometers an hour with no brakes or throttle, just lets the car do all the scrubbing of the speed. And he's got cornering load on it at that point. That's exactly what he's doing. Absolutely classic Max Verstappen, just getting everything settled, perfect weight transfer, giving him the straight exit that he wants out of the corner. Lewis Hamilton, 61. So of the list there, quickest. George Russell even quicker, 63. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, George, 63 minimum speed. Lewis, 61. I say, in reality, that's not a good thing. I think the lower the minimum speed, the more indicative it is that they're getting the rotation point absolutely right, within reason. Obviously, you're going to get some colapintos at the back going quite slowly in the middle there as well, but that won't be because of the rotation point they're doing. And Kimi Antonelli, 60 as well, same as Lando Norris, not as slow as Max or Charles, but getting there. It's funny, isn't it, to be talking that way? The other driver that did a lot of scrubbing of speed with no throttle and no brakes while he's got load on the car was Lando Norris. He slows from 64 kilometers an hour to 61, scrubbing, letting the car just scrub off speed. But he's doing that. The reason he's not losing as much as Max is because he's doing it more in a straight line, whereas Max has got a lot of load on the car at that point because he's getting in earlier to the corner. So it kind of, I think, bears out everything we were saying in the sketch at the beginning of this video. So that's why I say it was a really interesting session, and that little cameo right at the end of that, of all those long runs, and everybody out there doing consistently quick laps. It was the first time we could really do some comparisons between the drivers, because before that, when they were on light fuel and they're running the hard or the medium or the soft, there was so much traffic, there was so much stop start and slow fast that it was very, very difficult for anyone to gauge any sort of picture of where we are. So that was Friday at Monaco. Roll on Saturday and Sunday. They predicted thunderstorms when I was looking at the forecast yesterday for Saturday, but that seems to have gone away now. But it is changeable. It's frontal rain there, of course, with the mountains and so forth. So anything can happen in that part of southern France or Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo's in Monaco, isn't it? Or is it other? No, Monte Carlo in Monaco, that's right. So anything can happen there. And it would be interesting, of course, if it was a wet qualifying session, wouldn't it? It'd be very interesting. Anyway, that's the pattern. If it is wet, that's the pattern of what they're going to be doing in the dry. And at the moment, it looks as if Sunday, come what may, is going to be a dry race. That's the prediction. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to TrackNinja, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to REC Watches. To you, the viewer, see you tomorrow. I told you Lando would be on the... Oh, sorry. WhatsApp, phone's down. Yeah. Lando Norris on the pole for Monaco. I was having a bit of a laugh there with a mate who thought Oscar would be on the pole. I said, no, it's going to be Lando. This is last night we were doing that, so I was just getting back to him then. Yeah, what a great lap by Lando Norris. It's one thing to do it around Monaco to get the pole for the Monaco Grand Prix. It's got an incredibly nice ring to it, that phrase. And of course, it brings with it the opportunity to win the Grand Prix at the slowest possible pace, assuming, of course, you can get your strategy right with this new 2-stop deal they've got in 2025. But I'm sure McLaren are on top of that. Famous last words. No, I'm sure they are. But it's even better, I think, when you get the pole and you break a barrier, the 1 minute, 10-second barrier, and you do it in 1:99. Just phenomenal lap by Lando Norris. Congratulations to him. And looking back now, I'm trying to put it into context. I think a lot of it comes down to these two images, courtesy of Pirelli, we were looking at yesterday as they go into Rascasse. I did an analysis of that corner yesterday. I won't go on at length about it, but to me, this was the decisive moment when I saw this of qualifying, on the assumption that you always believe McLaren would be on the pole at Monaco, which I did, because Ferrari were going to have very good traction around Monaco. That was going to be their big thing, and that was going to give them decent top speed. It was going to give them reasonable confidence to get the car set up and balanced for the medium speed and high speed corners. But McLaren have still got that aero efficiency advantage, and that adds up to downforce. It adds up to more suspension compliance. It adds up to a million other little things you can do to the car to get it absolutely right. So in my mind, McLaren were always going to be on the pole. The question was which driver. I've been going on about how Oscar Piastri used to turn in quite early, and he was quite good at short corners in his first couple of months at McLaren. And you count the white markings on the road, the pedestrian crossing there, you can see how early Lando's getting into the corner. Now, he's not as early as Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc, but even to do what he's doing there requires a massive amount of finesse and touch, which Lando's always had. I've always said it's a bit of a shame that he doesn't then parlay that into getting into the corners even earlier. But to me, when I saw that yesterday, I thought, yep, he's going to do it. And sure enough, from the position that Oscar Piastri's in there, and this would apply to several other corners at Monaco as well, absolutely for sure, the way he was going to be quick, if he was going to be quick, was going to be braking late as he possibly could without disturbing the car too much, and then getting on the power as soon as possible. And that was always going to lead, potentially, to big oversteer moments. And guess what? His two best laps were ruined by big oversteer moments. One at Mirabeau, one at coming out of Rascasse as well. And Lando was never in that situation because he was getting into the corner earlier and using that phenomenal skill he has, that lovely skill he has, that lovely touch that he has, using it so well. So yeah, that's how it happened. There's another small thing I've got to throw in as well, courtesy of ESPN. Thanks for this news. And this has nothing to do with me, of course, pure coincidence. But I've been banging on since last winter about how Lando and to some extent Lewis Hamilton should turn off their social media platforms, and Lando, to get the best from himself, needs to focus 100% on his side of the garage, the gut feel of driving the car, and basically switch off from everything around him and just make sure he's doing a great job for Lando Norris, and get rid of the social media, which elevates a sort of brand that maybe sometimes he has to live up to and requires a bit of time to service anyway. And guess what? Courtesy of ESPN came the news before the Monaco Grand Prix that Lando was indeed turning off his social media. So yeah, very, very good to hear that, and couldn't have done a better thing. And I'm not saying that it was necessarily in any way related to his getting the pole at Monaco, but I'd like to think it was. Another thing I pointed out yesterday was that when Oscar had that moment at Saint-Devote, it was a bit of a lift for Lando, because here's Oscar really making the first big mistake of the 2025 season. And it wasn't just hitting the wall, of course. I mean, we didn't have to say it because it was a Friday, but looking back now, I guess we can. There was an escape road there he could have taken, but he didn't, because I guess he's got a level of confidence now where he felt he could get that corner, he'd get into that corner, at the very worst, he'd just sort of lose a bit of time. But he hit the wall, and that was quite a big thing. You know, Lando's side of the garage, all of a sudden, very calm, very clean, nothing going on. Oscar's side of the garage, bit of a panic, new nose, this, that. And that was good. That was good for Lando. And it was good that he didn't actually change the way he was operating at that point. He just continued to go out. He wasn't necessarily super, super quick. He was just focused on what he was doing with setup and the car. And that was very, very good to see. That was the first sign, I think, that Lando this weekend was mentally going to be very, very strong. And then came Saturday. He was very good this morning, but not quickest. Again, just working away at what he needed to do, getting enough laps on the soft tyre. Of course, qualifying was a disruptive affair. It got better as we went through from Q1 to Q2 to Q3, fewer cars on the track, of course. And Lando just weathered all that and just stayed with it all the time. And he was very calm. And when Charles Leclerc took the pole with a 10-0 right at the end of qualifying, while Lando was still on his quickest lap, the place erupted, of course. Here was Charles Leclerc, last year's winner, the local hero in the Ferrari, which has been going very well all weekend, and Charles been there or thereabouts quickest all the time. Lando was on that lap. Of course, he didn't really know what was going on. He was just totally focused 100% on what he was doing the job there. And he crossed the line and he did that 9.9. I mean, what a pole lap for Lando Norris. And I would venture to say this will transform now the way he goes into the rest of the season. And just as I was saying, over the winter, that Lando's biggest problem is how to beat Oscar Piastri. It's taken a while, but I think now he's in a position to take the race to Oscar as we go forward from here. Of course, it's the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona next weekend. That's going to be really interesting. Anyway, from where we start now, it is Lando Norris on the pole. But this is another circuit where I wish the pole winner could choose which side of the road he wanted to start from, because in theory the right hand side gives you the inside run, but then again the left hand side is a bit cleaner, and whoever makes the best start off the line could well get the lead into Sainte Devote. It's easier, I think, from P2 at Monaco, to rephrase it, if you make a great start, to get in front at turn 1 than it is probably at most circuits. Anyway, Lando on the pole, Charles Leclerc second, Oscar Piastri third. And that's good news from Lando's point of view, as I was saying, because in terms of strategy for the race, it takes some of the pressure out of his side of the garage as to how they're going to run the race, because in theory, Oscar won't be breathing down his neck from lap 1, and they can think clearly about how they're going to win this. It's not going to be easy, because this whole 2 mandatory pit stop thing does open the door to somebody like, say, Verstappen to extend the first stint as much as they possibly can and maybe get a jump in traffic if Lando gets traffic, for example, if he's leading, gets traffic when he comes in on his outlap. So it's going to be it's going to be fascinating to see how they do this. I've expressed misgivings about this whole 2 pit stop thing at Monaco, not because I don't think it'll add to it. I don't really like artificial things, but we'll put that to one side. That's not my main problem. My main problem, the working conditions in the pit lane for the mechanics. It is without doubt the worst pit lane of the year. I don't use worse in the sense of Monaco shouldn't be on the calendar, but by definition, that pit lane is crowded and small and difficult in which to work. And it's a very tough weekend too for the mechanics. And so it's a big ask to have not one, but 2 mandatory pit stops now for every car. And the chances are, of course, that if there's a safety car or something like that, they're all going to come in on the same lap anyway. So that's what I don't like about this. It's putting a massive amount of additional stress and strain on the pit lane and those who work in the pit lane. And let's hope nothing goes wrong tomorrow at Monaco. It is not the largest of pit lanes in Formula One, that is for sure. Anyway, moving on from that, Lando Norris on the pole. And I got to say here, McLaren, kudos as well for the livery on the car this weekend, the way they've got the script on the back of the drivers. In the script that was used for writing the words Bruce McLaren or Denny Hulme on the side of a Can-Am McLaren. I asked Denny about that once, who actually did that. And he said, oh, yeah, it was just a local guy in America. We did it. Yeah, really good guy. Yeah, we just did it. And Bruce said, yeah, you like that one. And he went for that. Yeah, didn't take long. No graphic design studios in those days. But anyway, they got that script, kind of. And they've got the roundels on the car, which looks really good. Not sure that it works on the helmet, but Oscar Piastri's helmet particularly. Looks a bit like a pool ball. But I do love the roundels. I think it should be compulsory, don't you? That'll sort the teams out a bit. What else to say about Lando? Nothing other than I did say in the chat with Cameron last week, he's so good around street circuits. Something that was very obvious from the first time he went to Pau in Formula 3 and how good he was that year. And it's always been the case. He's really good, really, really good around street circuits when he's got lots of boundaries through which he can drive and around which he can drive. And that's because he's got a really sensitive touch. And whereas Oscar, from the radius in which he's getting into the apex at Monaco, is reliant, as I say, on getting on the power as soon as possible. And twice we saw on pictures, but it may have been even more, he got too much power on and lost the rear and therefore lost time. Lando isn't driving like that. He's not shortening the corners that much, as I say, but everything is very sensitive and very, very touchy, feely touchy, and that's how he drove that lap. Really, really nice to see. Charles Leclerc looked a bit despondent after when he got out of the car, but I don't think he should be. I think to get that car onto the front row at Monaco was a major achievement, and I still think that he and Max were by far and away, bearing in mind I'm talking about shortening the corner here in a really, really impressive way, the 2 best drivers through that Rascasse section. And Charles just got better and better through there. The quicker he went, the more grip he had, the more confidence he had. He just looked absolutely superb through there. And I don't think any other driver on the planet Earth could have got more out of that Ferrari today than Charles Leclerc. Obviously, it doesn't have quite the same downforce, quite the same suspension compliance over curbs as a McLaren around here, but he got everything from it. And to out-qualify Lewis Hamilton, who actually drove very well towards the end of qualifying. He's had a very, very incident-filled qualifying session involving incidents in traffic and things like that. But he actually drove very well right at the end, actually to out-qualify Max Verstappen in the closing minutes to get P4. But to be 0.3 quicker than Lewis was a lot around Monaco. And Charles Leclerc just breathtakingly good, I thought, today. Oscar Piastri third. As I say, a sort of Denny Hulmish 67 spec, very sideways in a couple of places, using the rear. He's got a style which should enable him to just drive that thing as he wants tomorrow in the race, regardless of what grip level he's got. He's on top of the car. He's confident. I doubt he's going to hit anything else this weekend. He's on top of that side of things, but he's not as neat and tidy as Lando, and he's not using the front end of the car quite as well as Lando. And that's where the lap went, as you saw from the images there. But Oscar, very, very good position, of course, for him too. P3. Max found the absolute limit of the Red Bull, no doubt about that. Didn't actually go any quicker on his second lap. There's no more time in the Red Bull. And for proof of that, Yuki Tsunoda didn't even get out of Q2 in the other car. So it's not an easy car to drive. Looked a lot more dodgy over the curbs than, for sure, the McLarens and even the Ferraris. And Isack Hadjar, very, very near Max in the Racing Bulls. Probably, as I've been saying for a couple of weeks, couple of months probably, the Racing Bulls is probably a quicker car than the Red Bull right now, than the RB21. I think it is. I mean, there's no way in the world Max would be that close to it if it wasn't a better car. So yeah, I mean, Red Bull has still got a lot of issues there. And you would imagine coming to a street circuit that all those would go away and it was just about driving. Well, it isn't. Monaco is about performance. It's about traction for sure. And there's a lot of talk about the swimming pool section, going into the swimming pool. There always has been. It's a very, very dramatic part of the Monaco lap. Super, super quick, 6th gear. And then they go through there and then break down to second or third or second for the tight right. But it's absolutely flat. It's absolutely flat through there. They accelerated out of Tabac, 5th, 6th, just before they turn into the left, and then boom, 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 straight through, flat out. So you can argue, I mean, that's even for guys like Liam Lawson. And so you can argue that section of road now is less demanding of the drivers than it used to be, partly because there's some nice curb there now. You can just flat the wheel over the curb and not have any issues at all. Of course, there was a time when there was no curb there at all. It was just a concrete wall and you just had to aim for the curve of the concrete wall. That was your apex. That was a difficult time, yeah. Ralph Schumacher will remember that one. So, yeah, and where else? Casino Square is still a demanding, great corner, top of the hill, the left-hander. There was a cameo there today, I thought, when Lewis Hamilton had a shunt at the end of FP3, when he came to the top of the hill in his normal way, going quickly, and there were two, and he suddenly, as he got to the crest, there were two slower cars on his left, and he jinked the steering to the right, and in doing so, got on the marbles a little bit and then lost it and clanged into the guardrail on the right. He was okay, but the car was quite badly damaged on the right-hand side. It was quite interesting, I thought, in Q1 when a similar thing happened, but in this occasion, Lewis was on the left, trying to keep out of the way, and Max was the quick driver. And Max's initial thought was, if Lewis is going on a slow lap, he should have waited for me basically to get into the corner, because he got the same thing. He went in, he saw Lewis left going slowly, and immediately had to jink the steering, got on the marbles, but didn't crash, didn't hit the guardrail, didn't spin. He had one of these moments, very high speed, but just kept it all going. The lap was gone, of course. And I thought that was an interesting cameo, difference between Max and Lewis. Lewis crashed. Mind you, in Lewis's defence, there was more than one car. There were two cars, I think. So he probably had to go a little bit wider than Max. I shouldn't be making too much of that. Anyway, it was great recovery by Max at that moment, not to hit anything. But I felt sorry for Lewis at the end of all that, because he now starts with a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Max Verstappen. And the problem was he got confused radio messages from his team. One of them said Max is coming up, and then they basically said he's on a slow lap, so Lewis didn't think any more about it. So it wasn't Lewis's fault, but he's got a 3-place grid penalty. That obviously elevates Max now to P4. There's got to be some irony there. I mean, Lance Stroll I've got to say, Lance Stroll, talking about traffic at the moment, Lance Stroll, today, I don't know how many incidents he had in traffic, but there was one when he came out of the tunnel and he moved over on, I don't know, I think it was Charles Leclerc, and Pierre Gasly was there as well and just passed him. And Charles had to go down the escape road. It was a massive moment. It wasn't the first time Lance Stroll's been involved in a traffic incident this weekend. There have been about 4 of them, 3 or 4. And he said, I couldn't tell the difference between the cars because of the sun coming out of the tunnel. I mean, this was, I don't know. I've got no response to that. This is a guy that's driving for Adrian Newey. I can imagine he'll be going to the headmaster's study fairly soon just to have a good, decent talking to, because that was just amateur stuff, really. It should not have happened. It was terrible. Big shout out though to Stroll's teammate Fernando Alonso, double world champion, who drove like a double world champion today. Absolutely superb performance. Run out of soft tyres on mediums, managed to get through to Q3. Unbelievable performance from Fernando. He did 11.1 on medium tyres. And to put that into context, both Ferrari drivers and both Williams drivers ran mediums at the beginning of Q2. Before they went to softs. It was very close between the mediums and the soft, kind of, although the softs were quicker if you got the perfect lap. And the fastest on the medium tyre in Q2 at the first run was Charles Leclerc, 11.3. Fernando in the Aston Martin on mediums at the back end of Q2, 11.1. Unbelievable. Really, really good performance from Fernando. And I think he felt that was one of the best laps he's ever driven. So, yeah, big chapeau to Fernando Alonso. He deserved that one. Mercedes, though, a horrendous qualifying session. Kimi Antonelli went off at the back end of Q1, pushing hard, not where I thought he would, somewhere like Casino Square or going into the swimming pool. He went off incredibly at the chicane and then did one of those really annoying things at Monaco and hit the apex guardrail on the left. I mean, he does turn in quite early, but, there was no reason to be doing that there other than he was just feeling the pressure on the overall lap, I guess. He hit the apex on the left, broke the front suspension, then clanged into the guardrail on the outside of effectively the right-hander then. Didn't take his hands off the wheel as he hit the barrier either. So I hope his wrists are okay. But that brought out the red right at the end of Q1. Didn't really affect anything. But, of course, that was the first big blemish for Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes this year. He looked pretty distraught as a result. I still think it's the pressure build-up of how much those medium and fast corners were meaning to Antonelli. He was doing very well on them, but as I said, at Imola, he was kind of doing what George Russell does through there, which is just unbelievably blisteringly quick and not doing any of the stuff he can do on the slower corners, where he is very good, very sensitive and very good at shortening the corner. But he wasn't doing any of that on the fast corner. It was just all George Russell stuff. And yeah, he didn't go off there, but I think the pressure of doing that just built up. And George stopped coming out of the tunnel, engine gone, battery gone, apparently went over a bump coming out of Saint-Devote, which then sort of hit something, dislodged something in the electronics and went up the hill, lost power, and then cruised down the hill and came to a halt in the tunnel. So both Mercedes out consecutively, and will start, 2/3 of the way down the grid. So I suppose from their point of view, they're thinking, yeah, at least we got the 2-stop strategy. We can play around with that a little bit, see what happens. And of course, you will see, I think we'll see somebody starting, or maybe more than one, starting on softs, probably, because it is a good race tyre. You've got to use the medium, the hard, obviously, but in the course of the race, medium or the hard. But you could start on softs. Somebody like George or Antonelli might think, yeah, get 3 or 4 cars off the line, maybe, because the soft will have an advantage off the line, I would imagine. So, yeah, terrible day for Mercedes. And if you're going to have terrible days, you don't really want to have them at Monaco on a Saturday, because you've got all the Saturday night stuff now with the sponsors and everything else. And it's a huge, huge weekend. This is why we have the Monaco Grand Prix, because it is such a massive weekend for Formula One and all the stakeholders of Formula One. I'll have to use that word now, I guess, succumb to it. And to have to say, never very good qualifying today, but we'll go well in the race tomorrow. It's all a bit difficult for Toto. But anyway, I'm sure he's quite capable of doing that. If anybody can persuade anybody that it's all going to be okay, it's Toto Wolff. Looking forward to the race tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and of course to REC Watches. Take care. See you then. The experiment didn't work. Not only was the racing just as processional as normal, but because of the 2 pit stop thing, there was so much slowing down of the cars behind you in order to try to get your advantage when you eventually came in for your pit stop, that it was just unbelievably boring. To me, this was one of the worst Monaco Grand Prix that have ever been held, and a classic example of trying to tamper with something that isn't right and fixing it the wrong way. Because these cars, the current 2025 Grand Prix cars, we'll put the 26 cars to one side because there's a little bit of an effort to try and make them a little bit smaller, I think, but I don't think it's going to happen. These cars are definitely completely out of sync with a circuit like Monte Carlo. There's been a lot of talk over the years about we should get rid of Monte Carlo from the calendar because the racing is non-existent. I've always said that's nonsense, because Monte Carlo justifies its existence because it's the shop window of Formula One, and all the beautiful people come to Monaco to spend their money, and in future to spend money in Formula One as well, probably along the way. And playing with it the way they have and did with the 2 pit stop thing was just complete nonsense. Okay, from the bat, let me just say, delighted for Lando Norris that he managed to pull it off from the pole and win the Monaco Grand Prix. He's back where he should be in the 2025 season. Obviously, he's lost a lot of points to Oscar Piastri going in, and it's going to be fascinating, as I said yesterday, to see how they get on in Spain next weekend. Oscar Piastri, in what was obviously the winning car of the weekend, the McLaren, could only finish third, beaten by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, basically the grid order, but Charles driving the skin off that Ferrari. Well, I say the skin off that Ferrari, doing everything he could within the realms of not getting too close to Lando, because of course it was going to overheat the tyres. He was on mediums towards the end. Lando was on hard tyres, but nevertheless putting quite a lot of pressure on him, to the point where Lando actually said at one point, "Where's Oscar? We need him behind Charles to distract him and put a bit of pressure on him." So yeah, Charles drove a beautiful race. I think got the absolute maximum from that car, and soundly beat his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who finished only 5th, a long way behind in the other Ferrari. The grid order, basically. And Max Verstappen was 4th, where he started as well. So the 2 pit stops did not change anything around. All it did was make some aspects of the field and the grid and the lap unbelievably slow. And it was never better demonstrated in the early laps of the race, after a virtual safety car period had come out because Bortoletto had gone off and then rejoined. But it's never better shown when the virtual safety car went in. It was lap 7. Oliver Behrman had just come in for a new set of tyres, and he did a 15.5 at that point at the restart, first lap after the restart, when Lando Norris, in the lead of the race, was doing 18s. Of course, he was thinking, oh, I'm leading the race, slow things down. That's not unusual at Monaco. We've seen a lot of that in the past. The problem was the 2 pit stop thing magnified that throughout the race, and multiplied it, if you like, is probably a better word. And so we had, in midfield, we had sometimes Isack Hadjar doing 19s. I mean, it was just because he'd come in early to get his 2 pit stops out of the way early on. He drove very well. But 19s mid-race, I mean, this was like a boring Le Mans 24 hours for me. No element of Grand Prix racing in it really at all. And we know there's never going to be any taking at Monaco, but why not at least leave some of the other things, like can you do a long stint and get the tyres to last? Time management means something. In this race, because of the 2 pit stops, time management went out of the window as well. There was no skill involved at all. And at the end of the race, of course, none of the drivers had any sweat on their heads. It was just like a country drive in the park, except you couldn't do any overtaking. So for me, it actually comes down to 2 very funny things. One was George Russell, who was obviously annoyed and being held up massively by his mate. Actually, I thought they were really good mates, Alex Albon. I'm sure they're not anymore. But Albon going unbelievably slowly in the Williams, sort of 4 seconds off the pace, 3 seconds off the pace, and then suddenly doing a reasonably quick lap. And George behind him getting more and more frustrated. I mean, it was all meaningless anyway, because they were nowhere really, just right at 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that. And at one point, he just went past him. He just straight lined the chicane in frustration, I think, and just passed him and stayed in front and got a 5-second penalty. And one point, his radio said, "Oh, George, you better give the position back." And George said, "No, I'll take the penalty. Wait and see what the penalty is. I'll take the penalty because I'm too frustrated to sit behind him. He's too erratic." And I thought that was quite good, actually. I think that was that about summed up the race. It was absolutely ludicrous. And Kimi Antonelli actually did a similar thing later on. I think it was with Carlos Sainz this time at the chicane, but then did give the position back because he's a rookie, isn't he? He's not as funny as George when it comes to that. But I'm 100% behind George and his sentiment in that race. Later on, they started trying to give him some instructions and saying, well, this was happening. He said, "Look, I don't want to talk anymore. Just don't trouble me." Because obviously he's just completely and utterly fed up. Not just the performance of the Mercedes. It wasn't that. It was just the ridiculous way the race unfolded. Anyway, getting back to that battle, when Max was in front, and he got track position because he didn't make that second pit stop until right at the end of the race, but he was on average, I don't know, a second a lap slower than the McLarens, probably, maybe slightly less than that, but not quick today compared with how good Lando was, particularly in the McLaren. But it was quite funny because when Lando caught him, which he did quite easily on newer tyres, Max then just drove around in the low 16s, high 15s, and all Lando could do was drop away a little bit so he didn't damage his tyres too much. And it was quite obvious that what Max was doing was just trying to drive as slowly as he possibly could without Lando passing him, so that he gave Max more opportunity for Charles Leclerc to win the race. So Charles then sitting on Lando's tail. They're both sort of a second off their own pace. But of course, there's nothing he can do. He's just waiting for Lando to make a mistake, if any. And at one point, wishful thinking, I think, Charles got on the radio to say, oh, he's making lots and lots of mistakes now, hoping maybe that would go down to the McLaren pit. But he wasn't making that many mistakes. He was making a few tiny ones, but he was driving so within himself. I mean, there was a second off the pace, as I say. So Max was doing, I imagine, all he could to try and give Charles to win that race. Not necessarily to help Charles and be anti-Lewis, but in terms of the championship, it would be better. Obviously, his main rivals are going to be the McLaren drivers and not Charles. That's what he was thinking. So it was quite clever thinking by Max. But yeah, it didn't pay off in the end. And of course, staying out as long as he did, I suppose you could say there was more chance he was going to get the benefit of maybe a safety car or VSC. But that didn't happen either. Everyone was going so slowly that nobody really made any mistakes, except Pierre Gasly had a moment caused by a brake failure when he hit the guardrail and, yeah, coming out of the tunnel, a bit spooky. Alpine had a terrible weekend, absolutely abysmal. And that damage on the Gasly car won't have pleased them because they've already had so many shunts already with Colapinto and, of course, the big one with Jack Doohan. And now Pierre's had that one. It looked like a tub. It could have been a tub on that one, I think. And Colapinto, for his part, was in that massive train involved in the whole George Russell thing. He eventually finished 13th, but he was pretty inconsequential most of the weekend, obviously under strict instructions not to damage the car anymore because Alpine, I imagine, just can't afford to do any more repairs. So that was that. Really boring. And basically the grid defined the finishing order. Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Max, Lewis, Isack, Hadjar. Esteban Ocon drove really well in the Haas Ferrari, got his 2 pit stops very out of the way very quickly. And Liam Lawson, okay, yeah, finished 8th. Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz 9th and 10th in the Williams. George out of the points, obviously Antonelli out of the points as well. Oliver Behrman also drove well, finished 12th. Oh, yeah, and it was also a bad weekend for Aston Martin. Even though Alonso did that heroic job in qualifying, he was running pretty well, would have been comfortably in the points, but stopped out on the circuit with a blown Mercedes engine in the Aston Martin. And Lance Stroll was predictably nowhere as ever in all that traffic stuff as well. So not a good weekend for Aston Martin in front of Adrian Newey, who was there, as I say, all weekend on parade. So, yeah, if I'm sounding jaded, it's not because we've just done 3 videos in a row now. I'm jaded because it wasn't an inspiring race, and it wasn't what we want to see at Monaco even. I think, at least with the old format, there was some skill attached to extending the stint, or maybe coming in very early and then doing a massively long stint, or doing something like that where it meant something and something added up to a total. You could kind of put 2 and 2 together and get 4 with a bit of time management in the middle. Now, this was just nonsense. Nothing made sense. Well, it all made sense. It made so much predictable sense that there was no racing element to it at all. It was just the grid. They might as well have just given the points out after qualifying. And all that remains is to say that it was great that nobody was injured in any sort of incident in the pit lane. And I think that was more by luck than judgment, because there were no safety cars to bring everybody in at the same time. Had there been, then it would have been a different story, I think. You could say, well, that's often been the case at Monaco, but I think because of the 2-stop element, there would have been much more traffic coming into the pit lane had there been a safety car at a pivotal moment of the race, as distinct from the very early phase when we had it. So not much else to say other than the other funny comment, and I'm glad it was up to Red Bull really to provide some of the entertainment, apart from forgetting to send Max out on a set of tyres to set fastest lap, which went to Lando Norris in the end on his last racing lap when he no longer had a Red Bull in front of him going slowly, and he could actually pull out a little bit of a gap from Charles Leclerc. So rather than cruising as you normally would at the end of the Monaco Grand Prix, he was absolutely on it, setting fastest lap. The other thing, though, was Max complaining mid-race about the sludgy gear change on his car. I don't know whether that got changed. We didn't hear him complain about it anymore, so maybe they were able to do something. I don't know. Press a button here and it'll work better. But he said, oh, my gear changes are as slow as the 1972 Monaco Grand Prix. A wet race won by Jean-Pierre Beltoise. Jean-Pierre's greatest victory. I wonder if that's what Max was thinking about. Maybe even in reading about that race on Saturday night before he went to sleep, reading about Jean-Pierre's great win. The race, he won that for BRM. And the reason he was so good in the wet was because Beltoise had a big motorcycle accident early in his career riding. He was very good on bikes. And he never really had a strong, I'm saying his right arm, as a result of that. And one of the few races where he was absolutely 100% competitive was that Monaco Grand Prix 72, because it was wet and there was much less load going through the steering, and it nullified the problem that he always had with his arms. So, yeah, it was interesting that Max thought about that during the race. He's a Jean-Pierre Beltoise fan. Mega. I'm kind of, I'm extrapolating here a little bit, but you got to after a race like that. Good on Max for even mentioning that race. So with that over, that sort of demonstration parade that we had this afternoon, everybody packs up now and rushes to Spain, to Barcelona, a proper racetrack where there will be overtaking. DRS will mean something. DRS at Monaco was a complete joke, as I've always said. DRS will mean a little bit, though, in Spain for sure. And it's a proper racetrack with some good corners. And it'll be fascinating to see how the Lando Oscar Piastri thing hits the ground now. And also, of course, where Ferrari and Red Bull are relative to McLaren. Bearing in mind, in Spain, there will be new front wing regulations and testing for flexi wings. So in theory, the teams will be appearing with new configurations. Will that change things? We will see next weekend. Before we go, quick word about REC watches. Brilliant timepieces related to Formula One history. I'll finish our little trilogy here with a mention again of the Lotus 98T chassis number 4 watch, which celebrates the car that Ayrton Senna drove in 1986. Didn't win the Monaco Grand Prix, but he did win Detroit that year in the black and gold Lotus Renault, designed by Gérard Ducarouge. So this is a good excuse to have a nice picture of Duca there, because what a guy he was. He was a good friend, very good friend to me. I was a journalist. He was a French designer, but we always had a good chat. Whenever he saw me, he always took time to say hello and tell me what was going on and what mods he had made to the car, whether it be the Ligier, the Alfa, or the Lotus. And it was a great car. It was a very good car. They didn't have great reliability that year, but nonetheless, Ayrton had those 2 wins. The other was in Spanish Grand Prix. And here's a scene from Monaco that year. Pit lane, as I say, changed quite a lot. That's Peter War talking to, and I've got this in there because that's Colin Watts he's talking to, one of the great Formula One mechanics who still does quite a lot of work for Williams in the Heritage Centre, Watty, a guy that I was lucky enough to hire when I was TM at Williams, one of the first mechanics I hired from Team Lotus, and he came to us at Williams, did a great job on the 14 and every car thereafter, and came up with the celebrated phrase that no well-meaning mechanic should be able to do the buttons up on his shirt on a Monday morning. The calluses on your fingers should be so bad that you can't do that. They were the days, weren't they? I think most of the mechanics after this year's Monaco Grand Prix will be able to do the buttons up on their shirts. And why not? Things should get better, shouldn't they? Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, to REC Watches, and to you, the viewer. It's been a lot of fun. See you very soon. Spanish Grand Prix coming up.
Cheers.